Yay! Welcome, everybody. Hello. My name is Alexandra, and I am an IOCDF Advocate. I am your host today for this very special, super exciting, super important conversation about OCD in the LGBT community. Happy Pride, everyone.
I should have brought like some glitter or something, but anyway.
Oh, that would have been awesome. Chris, where's your flag?
Woefully unprepared, all of us. Shame.
Yes, I have my Pride shirt on.
Oh, well done. Okay, you're doing great.
Yay! So I'll carry the pride for everybody today. And I am joined today by Chris Trondsen and Justine De Jaegher. And so we are super excited to get this conversation rolling. Before we do that, I have a few announcements from the IOCDF. And if everybody could say hi while I get this up and tell us where you're watching from. Let's see. All right, so this live stream is educational and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please work with your provider or contact a local clinician. You can use the IOCDF's online resource directory at iocdf.org. Find help to locate a trained clinician near you. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline. If you are in a crisis or you are ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room or call 911 or the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255. We want to create a safe space and be kind and respectful to everyone. At the end of the day, we're all here to support one another. A note that this is being broadcast on several social media platforms, and is being recorded. All right. And let's go ahead with that out of the way and get this rolling since we do only have an hour. And so today on this very special, very exciting Pride edition of our live stream, I am being joined by Chris Trondsen, and I'll go ahead and introduce him. Chris Trondsen suffered from undiagnosed severe OCD, BDD, major depressive disorder, and anxiety and panic attacks beginning as a young child. It was not until his early 20s that Chris received both a formal diagnosis and specialized treatment. Chris began advocating publicly for mental health and shared his story of recovery on TV, including The Dr. Drew Show, The Montel Williams Show, and NBC, as well as in various newspapers and websites, including BuzzFeed and Vice. Additionally, Chris began speaking at annual OCD conference, including giving the keynote with his mom at the 2011 conference. He also helped start the young adult track at the annual conference. After completing Chris, we're missing a word here in your bio.
No!
Yes, after completing a blank, Chris treats individuals with OCD and BDD at the Gateway Institute in Costa Mesa, California. He also currently serves as the Vice President of OCD Southern California and is a leader of the IOCDF's BDD and LGBTQ+ special interest groups. As a lead advocate, Chris's passions include expanding BDD awareness and education, addressing LGBTQ+ issues in mental health treatment, and expanding the IOCDF services to the young adult community. Yay! Welcome, Chris. We are super excited to have you, even with your missing word in your bio.
I know, we have to update it. I don't know what happened there.
Where's your flag, Chris?
What?
Where's your flag?
It's right here. One of my clients gave it to me. Yeah, one of my clients gave it to me, and I was like, I'm going to bring it from my office to my house today for the live stream. So I don't have like a stand.
Aw, maybe next year.
That'll be my Amazon wish list.
I'll bring it to you to the conference.
Yes, I'm going to hold you to it.
And now we will introduce the amazing, wonderful human being, Justine De Jaegher. Justine is a Canadian living with OCD, having been diagnosed at the age of 20. Originally from Winnipeg, Manitoba, she now resides in Ottawa, Ontario with her wife. She is a co-facilitator for her local goal support group and is involved in 2 IOCDF special interest groups, the Faith and Mental Health and LGBTQ plus groups. Justine works in political action for a Canadian labor organization and is an advocate for progressive social and economic policies. She holds a BA in economics and political studies from the University of Manitoba and an MA in public administration from Carleton University. She is dedicated to expanding access to evidence-based mental health care by reducing stigma around mental illness and removing financial barriers to care. Yay, Justine! I am so excited to have you here.
Excited to be here. Also, my wife's blowing up the chat, I can see. I got so excited to see someone from Ottawa in the chat, and it's her.
That's awesome. I actually have not looked over there, so let me just take a... Oh, yay!
Yeah.
All right, guys, so let's get this started. Happy Pride again. I am so excited that it is Pride Month. I have genuinely been out like for this past year. And so I feel just so much excitement at actually being able to participate in Pride activities and just take part in the community. So this is just such a wonderful opportunity and super special to me to be able to host this conversation.
And we're so excited to be here too. It's nice also to have, I don't know if this has been the case where you folks are located, but this will be our first kind of in-person Pride, our first return to in-person Pride since COVID. So very exciting.
Yeah, no, same here. I think maybe we had one last year, but it wasn't as like big. It wasn't in LA and stuff. It wasn't as big and as open and things like that. I think it was pretty minimal, but they added like West Hollywood Pride and then they had LA Pride. So it's been insane out here. We didn't have that the last couple of years. So it's awesome to kind of get back to some normalcy for sure.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if we had one here in Atlanta last year, but I think this year was like the big one. And unfortunately, I didn't get to go because I still have an unvaccinated little human at home, but hopefully that'll change soon. So I'm hoping to get out there. And I've already told Katie O'Dunn that she's coming with me next year. So we're gonna go Pride it up next year.
Nice.
Yeah, it's nice to be back in person. I mean, I think with everything going on, community is so important. I think a lot of times, just like I always liken, OCD and LGBTQ in the sense that you always kind of feel like an other or like an outsider at times. And so community is so important. That's why I'm so psyched about the conference coming up in person and just being able to like reconnect with people you haven't seen in years and all of that. And then it's the same with like Pride, just being able to connect with people. And it doesn't mean that you don't fit in with other people. It just means like sometimes you're surrounded by people that you look left and right and you're like, they get it. They totally understand.
No, I agree with that. I think that community and representation are so important. And I think that's part of why doing this is so important. Sometimes it's not even about, having necessarily serious conversations, but just seeing yourself represented, within your community group. It makes a difference. So let's jump into these, Justine.
Oh, no, I said, yes, that's huge. Just concurring.
So I wanted to ask you guys a few questions and kind of get the conversation going. And I think for me, one of the biggest things that I found kind of important, whether we're talking about intersectionality of race or culture or, sexual or gender orientation, is how it impacts having OCD and our journeys with it. And so I wanted to ask you guys how you feel that being a part of the LGBTQ community and having OCD impacted your journey with OCD.
Do you want to take it from this, Justine?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess, kind of Chris touched on this in the positive sense, in the positive value of, having community and representation and visibility, but it is unfortunately homophobia exists, transphobia exists, and stigma against mental health exists. So mental illness, I should say. And so, it is yet another layer sometimes of kind of discrimination or oppression to navigate just generally in life. But I think also, there's maybe an important consideration around mental health care and the LGBTQ community. in really not wanting to be pathologized for your sexual orientation, in my case, right? Really wanting to, be treated for my OCD, but in an environment where I feel comfortable and safe around my sexual orientation. And, I think, again, the mental health community, the community of practice around psychology, there's enough recent history, the DSM did qualify homosexuality as a mental disorder until 1973 or 4, I believe, so there's history within living memory, around kind of the pathologizing LGBTQ people. That's fine. So I think that's an additional concern for sure. And building that kind of rapport with a clinician and that trust is so important, right? With OCD, you're dealing with, sharing really intimate, oftentimes taboo kind of obsessions, compulsions, et cetera, that we don't necessarily share too widely. I'm starting to now with the OCD advocate role, the IOCDF advocate role, but it's a really intimate thing. And if you're worrying about whether or not your clinician is affirming of your identity, and that's going to be an important kind of issue to navigate in treatment.
Yeah, no, I would say like the first way that it impacted me that I can remember is I had really bad relationship OCD in high school. And it was centered mainly around friends at the time. It later became part of my first relationship, but I was abnormally, intensely hyper-focused on being accepted by others. And it wasn't like the typical high school, like I care. I mean, it was literally where I wouldn't sleep at night. I remember summers were really hard because I was afraid I was like losing contact with people and I was going to go back to school, and like very catastrophizing like OCD does. Nobody will be my friend. I'll eat lunch alone. Like I would get sick to my stomach. And I think being gay and in the closet in high school didn't help that situation, because that was just like another layer that my OCD was like, you got to figure out. You got to make sure that, people don't say this and don't do this. And obviously, like once the OCD got better, there still is that in society. I mean, it was like being a therapist for many years. I was never open about my sexual orientation in the fear that some client would see my sexual orientation as political or something and not want to work with me, even though I could help them and, just things like that. But that was like the hardest part just in high school, like being very closeted about it. And it really negatively impacted my OCD. I had a lot of anxiety, had a lot of depression because of it. So it contributed to the negative experience of mental health. And as we know with OCD, our external anxiety can really trigger the OCD, even if it's not a direct trigger. And so living in a state of constant just kind of like disgust with yourself and unaccepting yourself and anxiety that people are going to find out, I mean, that all contributed and just made the mental health worse. And I didn't have energy to kind of fight the OCD and other things because I was in such a negative place and hate for my sexual orientation. So I think that was a big part of how it all kind of intersected and just didn't make it any better. It made it harder and more difficult.
Wow, I still resonate with a lot of what you both said, and thank you so much for sharing, because it's such an intimate thing, I think, to share about this, because Justine, you're right. People still to this day, I think, pathologize, sexual orientation and gender orientation. And Chris, you're right. There's this part of hiding yourself and hiding who you are, I think, that is so difficult and contributes, and I think can even cause mental health problems. And I know I went through that to some extent, where I was hiding who I was, and I knew, that I was attracted to other women as well as men, but I didn't want to tell anyone, my family or my friends, because I was afraid that people would pathologize me, or they would think that something else was mentally wrong with me, or that they would take it as some kind of strange political statement when it's not meant to be. It's just who I felt I was. And I think that's difficult when people put those labels, pathologizing or politicizing something that's just a personal issue. So let's see, guys, I only have one screen, so I have to move everything around every time I go back to my points. I'm sorry.
It looks seamless on our end. We can't see a thing.
Well, I'm just going to own it, because that's part of it. maybe I'll get a second screen later. Maybe that'll go on my Amazon wish list.
That's amazing when people have double screens. So,
I mean, you know, I never expected to be doing these kinds of things, so I never felt the need for one, but I always think it's cool when I see people with double screens. So let's see. Has being a part of the LGBTQ community ever caused barriers for you in seeking treatment or talking about OCD? And I know we touched on this a little bit, but I'd really love to know, especially, you know, barriers or experiences you had with therapists. I know I have my own, which I'll share later.
I can start. I mean, to be honest, I haven't personally faced a ton of barriers. I've been relatively fortunate in that area where I've had really affirming clinicians and had really good experiences generally. But, you know, I am conscious of the fact that I'm very privileged in that respect, and particularly around, I think, financial barriers to access. You know, we know that members of the LGBTQ community do face higher rates of homelessness, of unemployment, of various other contributors that will make it more difficult to access treatment, which is, of course, fairly costly and inaccessible for many, and particularly inaccessible for many in our community. So while in my experience, I've been very privileged to have, you know, employer health benefits that have been able to cover a lot of my treatment, we know that there's a lot of people from our community who are being left out. And so that's an important consideration, I think.
I would say like the two places that I think of directly is I remember when I first started seeing a therapist for everything I was going through, he was like our OCD expert in the area who turned out to not really be an OCD expert. But when I first started to work with him, you know, my parents didn't really understand how OCD works. They didn't realize like it was something that, you know, they probably thought, I think, just that typically like all the stuff going on in my life might contribute to it. So I remember they went to him and kind of said to him, and my parents super supportive. My mom's actually gay and everything, so it's not like something where my parents weren't supportive, but they went to the therapist and said, look, like, we think Chris might be gay and he's kind of been keeping in the closet and it's been causing him like a lot of stress and stuff, and we don't know if that's partly contributing to his isolation, his suicide attempt, his depression, his anxiety, like all these things, the OCD. And so I remember like he handled it so poorly. He literally sat there and he's like, your parents think you're gay, but you're not gay, right? And it's like, no, not at all. No, that's not it. Okay, because they think it's what's wrong with you right now. And I was like, no, like that's not it or whatever. You know, so then I talked to my parents about it later when I came out, and they're like, we never presented it that way to him. We simply just said like, look, we know he's going through a lot, and this is one thing that we want him to feel open because we're accepting, and we don't want him to kind of hide it. And that's how my OCD made me, is very like isolated and hidden. But I would say like the biggest way that it impacted me was when I was struggling with relationship OCD in my first relationship, and I was still seeing a therapist and trying to work everything out. And it was just constantly in my head, changing the name, changing the pronouns to act like I was in a heterosexual relationship, because I didn't know, you know, if my therapist was accepting. And we had already started working together, making so much progress in OCD. And so I was dealing with this bad relationship OCD, but not really talking about it because I was always so obsessed that I was going to slip up and say the wrong pronoun, and then she was going to know I was gay. And what if she doesn't like that? And then she like sabotages my treatment and everything. And then I don't know how it happened, but I think one time I just finally just told her, and she was super, super supportive. And so I just look back, I'm like, man, I could have gotten so much help with that relationship OCD in my relationship so much sooner if I would have just opened up and been comfortable. So I think that those are two off the top ways that I think it definitely impacted me for sure in my care.
Wow. Yeah. Justine, did you have anything? Oh.
No, yeah. I mean, I was just reflecting a bit more on my own experience. And I suppose, you know, I've struggled most recently with kind of scrupulosity OCD, so with more of a religious theme. And I think there it's just kind of a tricky thing to navigate with my sexual orientation as well, right? Because so many, unfortunately, major world religions, at least, you know, from a doctrinal point of view, kind of espouse oftentimes fairly anti-LGBTQ views, unfortunately, which obviously don't agree with. But I think engaging in treatment around scrupulosity specifically, you know, I was very nervous and bordered on obsessing around, you know, whether I would be pathologized within that context, within the context of religion, either by my clinician, by, you know, faith leaders who maybe are engaged in OCD work, but maybe do ascribe to some of those more kind of, I suppose, conservative, you know, biblical literalist views. So I suppose that was a bit of a barrier to that subtype specifically. I mean, not that ultimately OCD is OCD, but there's, I think, an interesting dynamic there around being a queer person of faith, and just having that recognized as you know, we exist, we're there, we're often in a minority, but well, we're, yes, definitely in a minority, but you know, those perspectives are valid, and I think there'd be an additional layer of concern there around, pathologizing my sexual orientation.
Yeah, I really resonate with that, and I think it's so hard when you have OCD and you're trying to figure out your sexual orientation or your gender orientation, and you're kind of going through all these things, especially when you're young, and you're kind of searching for who you are and how you express yourself and how people perceive you, and then you've got that added layer of, you know, obsessions and compulsions around everything that you care about. I know that I did not have a lot of money, unfortunately. I did not come from privilege. And so I would go to counselors and try to figure out my sexual orientation, and end up ruminating and bringing them into my ruminations and obsessions, and running circles around them until they kicked me out. And unfortunately, I didn't have the money to see a wonderful, affirming therapist until much later on in life. And by the time I saw him, I was so afraid to tell him, because let's see, you know, I'd been picked on or made fun of, or told that I was a fence sitter, or told that it was all in my head, or told in therapy that my sexual orientation was just something that I needed to figure out, and I needed to stop obsessing on it. That I didn't tell him for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years into our relationship. And of course, he was wonderfully affirming when I told him, but it took a long time. And I think that those things can, even just being in the closet about it, can create barriers in treatment, because you're not truly addressing the issues and questions that you have. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, no, I mean, everything you're saying was so true. It just all rings true. I just think of it. I came out to my mom in the very strangest way. I was at a gas station at like 3 a.m, and I had, one of my obsessions was like the cleanliness of my car. And one of the rituals I used to do is I used to go and run, you know, I used to go to like 24-hour grocery stores, because I like to go late at night when there was less people, because I didn't want people touching my stuff and, you know, being dirty and contaminating me. And so I would go to like gas stations before I'd go into the 24-hour grocery store, and I would like vacuum the inside of my car to decontaminate it before I put the clean items in. And I remember running out of gas, and I had to, because going to the gas station would have, it's just exhausted what OCD runs circles around. So I had to go to a gas station, and I got like one of those where you fill up the gas thing. The guy was not helpful at all. He was like really just like not like a helpful worker. And I was walking, and I got gasoline on me, and I smelled like gas, and I was pouring in the car, and I got it on me. And I didn't know what to do. I'm stuck at a gas station at 3 a.m. I'm now completely contaminated with, you know, I mean, it wasn't like chugged on me, but there's gas on me. I didn't know what to do. I was so freaking out. So I called my mom at like 3 a.m. She answered, and I was just like crying to her. I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm like frozen at this gas station. I'm contaminated. I don't want to get into my car to contaminate it, but I can't just like walk home and shower. I'm too far from home. I don't know what to do. And on top of it, I'm gay. And my mom was just very sweet. She's like, no, I know that you're gay. Like, I'm happy that you're open and stuff. And so we kind of talked about it, but it was just like these compounding issues on my back. And I think when you have OCD, you doubt everything, you ruminate about everything, even if it's not a subtype. I don't think I ever had sexual orientation OCD. I think sometimes because OCD is so black or white, like when I found women attractive, or like, just thought a girl was cute or something, it did sometimes have me question, but it was never like one of my major subtypes. But when you have OCD in general, you're just constantly ruminating and fixating on things. And so I think just having the OCD component and focusing all the time, it just was like dealing with this OCD on one shoulder, the sexual orientation on another. And in retrospect, it's sad that one of those needed to be dealt with in the same way. I mean, I was really treating it as the same impact as OCD when it should have just been something I could open up about. No one really cared, and I could move on with my life and have focus solely on getting better from OCD.
That's so sad, but that's the sweetest story too. I love that. I love how accepting your mom was and is. She's such a sweet human.
Oh, thank you.
So
Yeah, no, it was super what I needed, and that made me comfortable to start coming out to the rest of my family and, accepting that. And it felt less like that was an issue, and I could start really focusing on the OCD kind of thing. So
I love that. Yeah, and I think that really rings true for me too. It's like when you have your house in order, you're able to actually focus on the OCD treatment, because OCD treatment is so difficult. It is so time consuming. It takes a lot of your energy, and you almost have to have everything else out of the way before you can focus on therapy. And I saw that Bruce, hello, I'm in California. Finding a therapist who understands trans folks is so hard. I don't know if you put it up, Skyla, but if you could put up the IOCDF Find a Therapist directory, that would be wonderful. And there is an option there, Bruce, where you can click to find someone who is LGBTQ affirming.
yeah, I mean, it's already difficult finding. I know, like, a lot of times if I'm full and I'm trying to find like if a client specifically wants like a therapist in the LGBTQ community, it's hard to find. So I think, it is difficult. I can just imagine, if that's what you're looking for. But I mean, that's part of what we're doing. What we're doing is to just get more therapists like competent and affirming and working with the population, even if they aren't part of the population themselves. I think of like someone like Kim Quinlan, who's not part of our community, but an ally, and really works hard to understand and do her best to be a supportive therapist, regardless of the sexual orientation and gender identity of her clients. So just working on that, but it is difficult to find that. And I think what's scary for a lot of people, because I know it was scary for me, is you never know the person sitting across from you, how they feel about you. And you're opening up about the most private things, and you have no clue if the person across from you is sitting there thinking like, that's disgusting, that's a sin, that's terrible, and like giving you like kind of half effort because they're just like, I don't like having this therapist on my this client on my docket. So it's difficult. It's frightening.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think it is scary, but I want to encourage you that it is possible to find someone affirming. Affirming therapists do exist, and it might take a little bit longer, but you can find one, and you deserve to find one. So let's see, going back into my talking points, here we go. So I wanted to ask kind of the flip side of that question. What are some of the ways that being part of the LGBTQ community has made a positive impact on you and your treatment? Justine.
I was going to make a joke, which maybe I'll do. Yeah. I was going to say, well, being a lesbian, we perpetually share our feelings all the time. And so it was a bit easier maybe to come out around my mental health struggles with various partners over the years. That's a generalization, I know, but there we go. Yeah, I also think, it's that community piece, right? It's that feeling seen by others who have lived similar experiences. So, it's spaces like this, spaces like at the IOCDF conference that we're going to have for LGBTQ plus members. Like it's just nice to be in community with folks who have similar lived experience, right? And so that is an affirming thing. I found that in my life like that joke. That's great. So, I think it's encouraging in that way, and it's a good way to find community and a community of supports. I found that even locally in my support group, queer members of my support group and we chat as well more regularly because there's interesting shared experience there that's, I think, important to connect around.
I would say for me, when I started going to the conferences and I was going to a lot of talks about taboo intrusive thoughts, because I was having a lot of like harm intrusive thoughts, sexual intrusive thoughts, fears of just kind of spontaneously do something I didn't want to do. And those weren't my main subtypes. When I was in treatment, it was a lot more contamination and checking, magical thinking, and relationship OCD. And so when I started having those much more taboo intrusive thoughts, I would go to those talks at the conference just to really learn on, how to kind of manipulate the treatment to deal more with like intrusive thoughts and more of like the mental compulsions versus physical. And I remember like every presentation, it was like, when it would talk about sexual intrusive thoughts, it was like bestiality, pedophilia, homosexual OCD. And I just remember sitting in the talk, and then you'd have people stand up in the audience and saying like, my biggest fear is being gay. Like I would kill myself. I don't know what to do. And then, just that whole discussion. And I stopped going to those talks because I was just sitting there like, ouch, like this is what I hear in society. And now I'm hearing it in a place that I thought was so comfortable and safe. And it was actually like individuals who are part of the LGBTQ community starting to just kind of like befriend each other at the conference. Jess is someone that comes to mind. And we would talk about it, and we were all kind of just like, yeah, that really kind of sucks. And then when I became part of the, IOCDF, I was seeing them each week for our meetings for lead advocacy. I remember Liz McInville was bringing up a conversation about language. And the first thing I said is, we've got to come up with a different name. And I don't know if it was us who thought of sexual orientation, if other people had said it and we brought it. I don't remember it. To me, it doesn't matter who started it, but I just remember really us putting that down, putting it on the website and changing discussion. That was like 3 years ago, maybe. And ever since, it's really something that you don't see HOCD anymore. You don't have it like categorized in, in that kind of like, pedophilia, incest kind of stuff anymore. And also just people recognizing like the treatment isn't about like scaring your client and habituating to being gay. It's more so just recognizing like OCD creates doubt, and somebody who is cisgendered and heterosexual is having doubts about their sexual orientation or gender identity or both. And the treatment is really working on that doubt and not trying to solve it, and that living in uncertainty and not, compulsing or backing away or misinterpreting those intrusive thoughts. And so I've just seen in like the last 3-4 years, just a positive shift. And it really came out of finding other people at the conference that felt the same way and knowing I wasn't crazy coming up with it on my own.
I love that so much. I love everything you guys had to say. Justine?
I was just going to say, yeah, if there's one thing that people involved in the OCD community take away from this, to Chris's point, anytime you're enumerating a list around like taboo thoughts or things like that, don't go, what if I have bestiality? What if I'm a pedophile? What if I'm gay? We need to stop, because one of those things is not like the other, right? And so by treating them kind of in one breath, I think that's a pretty harmful thing. So.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that, the content doesn't matter, right? And if the content doesn't matter, then we should be able to use terms that are more affirming and inclusive, and not lumping everything together under just, harm. Because to me, right, being queer is not harmful. It's not something that harms me or harms other people. It's just an innate part of me, if that makes sense.
No, for sure. And like when I have a client who is having sexual orientation OCD, or I've worked with clients that are trans that are having gender identity, OCD and stuff like that. For me, it's what I've found from a majority of my clients is it's like they have somebody in their life that's LGBTQ. They aren't scared of the community. So if the clinician is going there and treating it like it's the worst thing in the world, the client's going to start focusing on that, versus when you teach someone really the mechanics of OCD, you're going to have these thoughts and these feelings that create a lot of doubt and uncertainty, and you're going to do whatever it takes erroneously to try to get that doubt to go away so you can feel back at centered and feel calm, regardless of what, it's an equation, regardless of what numbers, or in this case, subtype you put in, it's the same thing. So when I work with a client who's straight, married, family, and all this, and he's like, I go to the gym and I have these thoughts and stuff. It's like when I take the kind of gay out of it and just talk about the doubt and stuff, I actually find that clients get better quicker, because they're not so consumed by it. Because if you think about other subtypes, if you have an intrusive thought about harming, your daughter, and the whole focus is your harm on daughter, the person is going to have a really hard time letting go and accepting because of the graphic nature of the obsession. So if you kind of take it to more so, look, you're having doubts about your sexual orientation when you're at the gym. What if you kept going to the gym? What if you stopped scanning and checking? What if you didn't sit in your car for 30 minutes after and go through all the women you found attractive to reassure yourself? What if you drop those compulsions and let's see what happens, kind of thing? So I think that's important.
Love that, Chris. I love that. And I think that the only thing I could possibly add to this already beautiful discussion is just that for me, being a part of the community, which really I was inspired to do it through the IOCDF. I saw the LGBTQ SIG and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go for it. I'm going to do it. And maybe I'll never be open about it, right? But I'll have like a place where I can explore this. And it's something that when I explored it, it brought me joy. And I hear Katie say it a lot in relation to faith and OCD. If something brings you joy, then you can move toward that, right? And that's part of your values. And I think that's something, people ask a lot. How do I know if it's OCD or not? Well, it's not so much that you know it's OCD or not. You embrace the uncertainty. But if it brings you joy, then that's something that you can move toward. So let's see, my last question for you guys, and it's kind of a general question, it's a fun one, and then hopefully we'll have some time to get to questions from the audience, is what does pride mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, generally, first thing that comes to mind is kind of the historical roots of pride and the political struggle. And, the first pride, as we say, is the riot, the Stonewall Riots of 1969. In Canada, of course, the closest equivalent, I guess, in 1971 would be the We Demand rallies. But it is a space for political struggle and ultimately liberation. And that's as true as it was then as it is now. We've seen obviously a backsliding in mostly in the United States, but of LGBTQ plus rights. And there's still a lot of room to grow in Canada as well. I don't think we should limit our ambitions there. But on the flip side of that, I think it's important to remember the political history and the ongoing need for political action. But on the flip side of that, it's just an opportunity to witness queer joy and community and all those positive things, right? It's easy, I think, to get bogged down in some of the kind of trickier and more negative aspects of discrimination, of legislative backsliding, of inequality, et cetera. But it's also just great to have an opportunity once a year and ideally throughout the year, but to witness, queer togetherness, joy, and that itself, I think, is kind of a liberating, beautiful thing, and almost an act of resistance in itself to gather in community publicly and to say that we exist and we are, we're here, we're in your community, we're your neighbors, we're your coworkers, and we're deserving of legal protections and of affirmation by our colleagues, by our neighbors, by our loved ones. That's my rant about pride. I don't know.
I love your rant.
Yeah, it's funny because while you were talking, Justine, for me, I think pride has meant different things at different kind of like spots in my life. I believe, like in the very beginning, I mean, pride was a place. I don't think people who are like heterosexual understand what it's like to be, get like LGBTQ in the world, in the sense that it's like, I always think of people that are single and straight. I'm like, you can go to the grocery store, you can be at the movies, you can go anywhere. Like that's not how it is for us. So for me, really what it was like the first time I went to Pride. So I didn't really participate in the LGBTQ community until I was like 25, because my OCD was so bad. I mean, I was isolated. I wasn't doing anything anywhere. I was dealing with those internally. And even after coming out, it wasn't suddenly like going into the community. I actually got into the community because I was working at a gym. And one of the people that came in, we became friends, and he kind of introduced it to me, but it came a lot later on my life. So for me, it was like, oh my God, so I kind of had the first dating years and all those things like at that later age. So that's what it meant then. What it means to me now, I think what makes me the most sad is I do work with a lot of like teens young adults and different things like that. And, pride's important to me, but I think when I think of pride, what it's more important for me now is just, I see my clients, and I see stories of people from all over the world, but, when you have OCD, like I said, you're in your head constantly, you're questioning things, you're doubting things. And I just see a lot of my clients that are young, that are LGBTQ, it's really struggling. And they, feel like the whole world is kind of against them and thinks that they're disgusting and thinks that they're bad people. And it weighs on their mental health. And we have to be sharp. We have to be upbeat. We have to be focused, and we have to have energy to fight OCD. OCD is such a draining disorder to handle all the time. So if somebody who's young adult going to college, have people writing swastikas and things on their campus, it's bringing on depression, isolation, and sadness. And now they don't have the energy to fight the OCD. The OCD is getting worse. So what I hope Pride Month to a lot of people this year is just, hey, there's a lot of loud voices that are trying to bring this community down, but there's just as many loud voices, if not more, that think that you're amazing for who you are, and you don't have to go into hiding and depression and sadness and isolation.
I love that. That was beautiful. And, I want to acknowledge what Leanne said in the chat. Pride is the pretty party, glamorous face of the struggle for human rights we should not have to fight for in the first place. And yes, I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with that. And, I want to acknowledge there is a lot of rainbow washing. There is a lot of kind of people focusing on, the rainbows, and that, it's just so exciting, and we get to paint our faces, and, all this stuff. It's a big party. But to Chris's point and to Justine's point, I feel that Pride is a moment of hope. It is something that we can kind of look forward to, where we get to be in community with like-minded people, and where you can kind of be yourself in a safe and welcoming space. And I think sometimes just having that can be such a relief, no matter who you are, no matter what you are, no matter how you identify, just to be able to be fully, wholly yourself, even if it is one month out of the year. And I think in times like this, where we have backslid, thanks United States, and we're facing so much division politically, and it shouldn't affect us, right? But it does. I think that having that is that much more important. And if we have to deal with some of the prepackaged stuff and, the party and the rainbow washing, then so be it. Oops.
Yeah, I'll also just add around Pride, as we think of it, maybe with the parades and things like that now. I mean, visibility is so important. I think it's great. But, we do have to be extra vigilant now in this era where, corporations will, on the one hand, slap a rainbow kind of filter over their logo, but on the other hand, will, donate to causes or politicians who actually actively harm our community. And I would say that folks should be vigilant around that, around mental health supports as well, right? Similarly, people who claim to be so supporting of mental wellness and, combating stigma associated with mental illness, and yet don't support the kind of legislation, the kind of policy that would actually expand access to treatment, that would support, remuneration and good working conditions for clinicians, et cetera. I think we have to be really vigilant around that kind of thing. And particularly around Pride, we see it more and more, because the social acceptability around not putting that rainbow on your logo, is less, which is a good thing. At the same time, we need to make the social acceptability around some of these more concrete actions, legislatively, financially, et cetera, also much lower.
Well said. I agree 100%.
Yeah, no, I saw Patricia's chat in the chat about like the AIDS quote and stuff. And so didn't know much about it because it was before my time, but my mom educated a lot on it. And I remember going to a conference once, or maybe it was like local, like OCD SoCal or something, but somebody who was talking about it, he had severe OCD in the 80s, and he's gay, and his OCD around AIDS and stuff, but it still affected him to this day. And so, there's all those different influences and stuff. And what I've noticed for a majority of my clients is now I don't hear as many clients coming in with fears around getting HIV or AIDS. Not that that doesn't exist, but it just doesn't seem to be as big of an obsession as it was when I started working in the OCD community, 12 years ago, because there is so many advancements. It's just not as talked about. But for him, it was still like, because he had lived through it. So it was important for us to kind of explore that a little bit when he was talking. And I was at one of our events and I was asking him questions about it and just like recognizing like, hey, all of our kind of past stuffs can sometimes get screwed around by OCD as well. And so it's just all important. I think it all impacts us. Going back to like pride and support, there's so much research that shows when somebody's dealing with anything, whether it's a mental or physical disorder, support definitely makes it more likely that you're going to get better. And so when people have a community to go to and can discuss like-minded things, they're more likely to stick with treatment. They're more likely to be effective in treatment. So that's why it's important as well, is, it's going to bring people to getting treatment and have a support system when they do so.
Yes, I agree 100%. And I think to me, that's the takeaway. We do need to be vigilant, right? But community is also so important. And I see Justine's mom in the chat. Hi, Justine's mom. She is amazing. I agree with you. She is wonderful.
Yeah, the chat's very populated by my loved ones. It's very nice.
I love that.
Sweet.
Hi, Mom.
So let me see if I can get in a couple of these questions that we had submitted. We're going to run up right to the end of the hour, unfortunately, but we're going to try to get them all in there. Are there any support groups, online or in person, for individuals with OCD who are also LGBTQ?
Yes, I know of some. Certainly the IOCDF, if you do some searching, I don't know if they're specifically LGBTQ, but there may be some, but they have a whole resource directory of affirming clinicians, but then also support groups as well. I know NoCD, treatmyocd.com, I believe it is, offers LGBTQ plus specific support groups, which are great. And then I'd also recommend looking out for a local goal group. That's the model that we use locally here in Ottawa. I found it extremely beneficial. Again, not explicitly for LGBTQ plus people, but it's an extremely affirming space. And there's a few of us in there. And yeah, so I mean, I think it's also just making those existing support group spaces, goal groups and others, just kind of making them explicitly kind of affirming spaces.
And what I was going to add too is, and I know Skyla already put it in the chat, but joining the LGBTQ SIG, like as we continue to get bigger, we can have more meetings. We can have more. Just what I would like to do is get to a point where we could have 2 meetings a month, where one is more just about action and one is just about community and stuff. And been helping Kyle King with like the young adult meetups. And so some months it's a support group, some months it's a speaker, some months it's just a hangout. So having that, so definitely, if you join the SIG, to be part of the LGBTQ special interest group, you don't have to be a therapist, you don't have to be an advocate per se either. You can just come, hang out, talk, give your opinion. So that's another idea for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that OCD peers may have a LGBTQ at least affirming support group. And I love that question. I feel like it's so important because I know I've done group therapy and I was the only queer person. And there was somebody with sexual orientation OCD and they were like, my biggest fear is to be gay. And it was so awkward. And, it's not that person's fault. Obviously, they were not a bad person and they were just seeking treatment for, their theme. But it definitely kind of left me with that feeling sometimes when I left the session, like I was left out or I was singled out. And so I think having those spaces and support groups that are LGBTQ, affirming would really be helpful, beneficial.
Yeah, what I was going to add to that too is one thing that I've seen powerful happen in the support groups I run is that, there'll be somebody with sexual orientation OCD and there'll be somebody in the group who's part of the LGBTQ community. And when they start to get to know know that person, they get to a point where they tell me, like, in an individual session, they say, you know what, I just don't have a lot of people in the LGBTQ community close to me, but meeting so and so, they're happy. They're way happier than me. You know, they're living like a great life, and here I am, like, obsessing and freaking out and worrying. Like, my brain was going to worst case, but they're living a best life. So still, I don't want an intrusive thought telling me the opposite of who I identify as and who I am as a person. But that worst case scenario that OCD is building, I'm starting to kind of pick it apart, because OCD makes it sound like I'd be miserable and crying on the floor. But, you know, these other people, or, you know, therapists running the group, seem super happy. So maybe it's not as bad as the OCD is catastrophizing it to be.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you can have those kind of connections and realizations happen in group, and that, you know, a good affirming clinician is going to catch those moments, right? And capitalize on those moments. I think that's great. So let's see. How would your approach to treating OCD in LGBTQ individuals different from those that aren't? Does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, I could say, you know, as a therapist, it does matter for a lot of different reasons. So first of all, you know, I know there's a lot of people out there that just don't understand, like, why pronouns matter, and why, like, you know, name somebody to, you know, creates a name for themselves and don't want to be dead named anymore and stuff, why it matters. And the reason it matters is because in OCD treatment, the person is going to be opening up to the clinician about very intense stuff. They're going to talk about, you know, feeling like they have cancer, or that they might push somebody out of a bus, or, you know, that they want to run over children, or they want to shoot up their school. I mean, it's like these intrusive thoughts that are horrific. It's already difficult to open up. But if you are sitting across from someone that doesn't even kind of recognize you as a person or affirm your identity, you're not going to be very open to that. And so what I've worked with clients that are in the LGBTQ community who had been seeing a therapist who specialized in OCD for years, and they never opened up about their intrusive thoughts because they just didn't feel comfortable, saw me, felt comfortable, and now we're much more likely to open. So I think that therapeutic alliance is the first reason it's super important. Second is it's important for a couple different reasons. I have clients that are LGBTQ in the community and are religious. And I know that you all are part of the faith in OCD, and they just really struggle because they feel like, you know, responsibility OCD. If I come out, it's going to really hurt my family, my community, my church. Intrusive thoughts around I'm going to go to hell and not be accepted, and will not be with my family because of that. So I see that a lot. I see it, like I said, with relationship OCD. It's important to treat it different, because sometimes, you know, like I'll work with clients with body dysmorphic disorder, for instance, who are like a gay man. There's different triggers and influences in BDD for a gay male that there is for a heterosexual male. And so you want to know kind of the way that that impacts somebody's body image. And, you know, relationship OCD, if you're with somebody of the same sex, it's like, you know, getting kind of jealous if they have friends of the same sex, whereas, you know, it's not as much in a heterosexual. So there's different ways that it can impact the, you know, kind of the way that the OCD manifests. And if you don't have an understanding of that, and you just kind of treat it as like a one size fits all, it doesn't always help the client.
That's such an amazing answer, Chris. Thank you so much. Justine, go ahead. I see you have your fan club in the chat, and I'm just loving it.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I was going to just say around, not a clinician, but one thing I've noticed that just in kind of the OCD world, around like kind of perinatal OCD, a really basic kind of thing I think to adapt to there would just be the around the idea of not assuming a mom and dad family dynamic, right? So we talk about postpartum OCD in terms of like a birthing parent, right? And you know, we hear a lot of conversation around how it can also impact dads. It can also, I imagine, clinically, again, not a clinician, but impact, you know, non-birthing parents who might be other moms, who might be other dads, who, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like that's an area too, where just some shifts around language could just be really helpful, just to create a more welcoming space.
And yes, we're on Team Justine. # Team Justine. I
don't know Leanne personally, but thank you.
So yeah, I think coming from just a lived experience perspective, I would say that when I was able to finally open up to my therapist by sending him the blog entry I wrote from the IOCDF Pride event last year, I think it really deepened that therapeutic alliance and helped me feel seen. And I think that that is just so important when you feel seen and understood and truly cared for. It makes a big difference in treatment. It opens up so many more avenues of communication. Just feeling 100% completely seen. There is something about that adds, something to treatment. And so let's see if I can get to this last question. I'm going to feel super amazing about myself. When is it OCD, doubt, and when is it societal pressure? Is your response different?
When they talk about societal pressure, like societal pressure and like coming out, or like your sexual orientation, or?
I'm not certain. It doesn't have an explanation. I kind of interpreted it as maybe societal pressure to be a certain way.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of weave it into Paula's question at 12:51. One of the questions I get asked a lot is like, how can you tell the difference between somebody struggling with sexual orientation OCD and how can you struggle with, or how do you know if somebody actually is? And I think Paula's question goes a little further, like how can you have them kind of connect? And so to answer the second part, Paula, I mean, I think it's like having. It kind of reminds me of the clubs in high school where you have, kids that are queer and you have allies and stuff. And so like bringing them together, because I've seen that in my own support groups, that when people have, sexual orientation, OCD, or gender identity, and they meet a client that's trans or gay, it's like, oh, okay, this like boogeyman the OCD built in my head isn't really that bad. But to answer the first part, when I was dealing with my sexual orientation, it was never about dealing with it. I always knew what I was. My fear more centered around how I was going to be treated by society. So there's not really a question. I went through the normal discovery most people do as they hit adolescence, but ultimately I knew that I was gay and I was just terrified of how society would treat me. That the society treating poor can be a fear of somebody who's heterosexual and worrying that they're gay, but their doubt is their sexual orientation itself. And so when we talk to our community, most of us know our identity or we're on the path of discovering, and it's not bringing us negativity, it's actually bringing us happiness and clarity. Whereas somebody with OCD, that doubt is causing them a lot of terror and uncertainty and panic. And it almost has nothing to do with the orientation. It's more about needing to know.
Justine?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's the intolerance of uncertainty really more than anything, right? It's that, but what if question, right? And yeah, I do want to. There's, I think, an important distinction to be drawn here around, folks suffering from sexual orientation OCD. I mean, it can be just questioning one's sexual orientation generally. It could be, a queer person who's questioning their orientation. But I do think there's an important element here, as Chris has noted, of, there's not societal discrimination and oppression, generally speaking, of straight people or of cis people, and so there is an added element there of fear that's not necessarily homophobic or transphobic, but fear of what are sometimes real societal ramifications, unfortunately, right? Or ramifications in terms of employment, unfortunately, or acceptance in one's faith community or family, or et cetera. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's important to kind of parse that out a bit. What's the nature of the fear? But if it's at the end of the day, if it's an willingness to tolerate kind of uncertainty around anything, including one's sexual orientation, that's OCD. But yeah, I just think it's worth kind of parsing that distinction out a little bit.
I love how you worded that. I really feel like that is an important distinction. And I think that, kind of to what Chris said, it's, for me, I already knew. And my fear was actually more around being rejected, and kind of a fear of abandonment by my family and my peers and by society. And, coming out, participating in community brought me happiness. It brought me joy. It brought me closer to what I loved. And so I think that that is something that sometimes we can use as a way to figure out who we are and, where is this coming from? Is it coming from a place of fear, or is it coming from a place of intolerance of uncertainty, or is it making my life happier?
No, good
Yay!
distinction. And I hope that clarifies for people, because that's a big question I get asked a lot. Like, how can I tell the difference between the two? And I think hopefully it was clear, because it felt clear to me.
I thought it was clear. Yay, guys, we did it. We talked for an hour, and I am so proud of us. I think this has just been such a wonderful conversation. Yes, happy Pride again, everyone. And if you want to stick around for just a few minutes, Justine and Chris, did you have any kind of like closing remarks you wanted to make?
I guess just, thanks to the IOCDF, to you, Alex, for hosting this. I think it's just, let's keep these conversations going. I think they're really important. It is nice to be in community with folks, obviously, who also have OCD, but who are also, of the LGBTQ plus community. And so, I hope these are conversations that continue on. And also, if there are any Canadians in the chat, aside from my family members and friends, we'll see you at Capital Pride maybe in August, because that's when we do ours.
Thank you so much, Justine.
What I was just going to add is, first and foremost, definitely make sure, if you're interested to join the LGBTQ SIG, I think it would be important. And I know Skyla put in the chat. So if you're a clinician, a family member of someone, somebody who is an ally, we'd love to have you. And then the last thing I'd say is, to clinicians out there, it is so important to consistently attend things like this, whether it's around LGBTQ issues, other marginalized groups. And it's important because sometimes I think clinicians treat OCD like a one-size-fits-all, but I find that the more that you tailor it to the specific person's needs and have a good understanding of where they're coming from, the better the treatment goes. So I hope that clinicians continue to attend things like this.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was wonderfully put. And guys, I just have a couple of announcements and then we are done. So let's see here. On Tuesday, join lead advocate Reverend Katie O'Dunn for this month's Faith and OCD Roundtable at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific Time. The topic will be on separating faith from OCD with Dr. Patrick McGrath, Dr. Jedediah Sieve, and IOCDF Advocate Alexandra Rosenberg. You can submit questions ahead of time on social media at IOCDF or online at iocdf.org/peace of mind. For Research Roundtable, let's see here. Registration is open for the annual IOCDF Research Symposium in July. We invite researchers and students to share data and findings from their latest OCD and related disorders research. This year's symposium will be a hybrid in-person online event. Learn more and register at IOCDF/symposium. Registration is open for the 27th Annual OCD Conference taking place in Denver this July. Yay! This special event is for the entire OCD and related disorders community, including individuals, family, and supporters, therapists, and researchers. Learn more and register at iocdf.org/OCDCon. This live stream is one of many. You can see the entire schedule of future streams at iocdf.org/peace of mind. You can also view recordings of our past live streams on IOCDF's YouTube channel, youtube.com/IOCDF. Remember to like and subscribe to get notified when live streams are scheduled. To be notified of when we're going live, follow the IOCDF on social media and subscribe on YouTube. If you need resources, please visit iocdf.org. And thank you so much. Everyone have a beautiful day.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.